Welcome one, welcome all. Welcome to another episode of Fan Team Radio. I'm your host Shayem Khan, joined as always by my co-host Chris Odorizzi. Chris, what's up?
Hey, Shyam. Man, what a race. Austria. I love this
What a
track.
race.
Yeah, it was great. Actually, really interesting sprint weekend. Give a couple track details real quick. First Grand Prix 1970. Pretty cool. Fan favorite track, Red Bull Ring, now owned by Red Bull, which is great. Circuit length is about 4.3 kilometers, or otherwise 2.7 miles. We had 71 laps. And yeah, what a crazy race. Overall great weekend. Um, but I think this was Max Verstappen's first blunder. It just didn't seem to come together for him this weekend. Uh, I, you know, uh,
P1 didn't seem to come together
you
all
know,
that well for him.
P, P
If that's any indicator of how Red Bull's or Max's season's going right now.
Listen, I mean, he had P1 in practice, he had P1 in the sprint shootout, P1 in the sprint, P1 in quali, and P1 in the race. But you know, that's expected. Like Max is expected to put up those kind of numbers, the shootout across the race, but crazy stat. And when I heard this from another F1 podcaster on Instagram, I believe. After Miami in lap 48, when he passed Sergio Perez, which was back in May 2 months ago, Max Verstappen has led every single lap since lap 48 in Miami until lap uh 25
25, yeah, lap
and
25 when he pitted for hards.
yeah, so including pits in Monaco, Spain, and Canada, he never ever not led a lap. And I thought that stat was absolutely mind-boggling, which means he always had a pit delta in front of him in every single race to be able to pit freely and keep the lead, which is just I think we're getting into a little bit of Christian Horner sweating on the brow of like we're gonna get canceled, bro. Because I think this happened to Mercedes a few years when they were in their ultimate dominant era, where the FAA changed some regulations to sort of stop their ultra dominance. And I think when Max does things like he did on the last lap of this race, where he they were like, we don't need to pit, we're good. Like, just take it in. And he's like, I prefer to box. And he just like went into the pits, put on softs, comes out 3 seconds ahead of Charles, and is just sitting there weaving down the road, warming up his tires with second place right behind him. Like he's like not even there. And I just like
It also doesn't hurt when your pit crew averages a stop time of like 2.5 seconds.
100%, but there's always like the Botas in Monaco issue where the gun jams and they can't get the tire off, and random things have happened in the pits before, and it doesn't seem to even cross his mind that there's a concern, there's an issue. I think the man's going for maximum points, going for the record of most points in a season, but what an ultra dominant performance, and we talk about him every week, but I don't even know what to say about this anymore, other than I hope that they take every race for the rest of the year just because.
Yeah, I mean, Max's dominance this year cannot be, I guess, at this point, understated or overstated. I guess he's just kind of left us in the dust as an audience as well. Hard to tell what the hell he's up to since the cameras are rarely ever on him, but
Right.
a 23-second delta, I mean, I see where he's coming from, with that Kobe mentality. He wants it all and he wants to make sure he has a pristine season. And, it's up for grabs. That 1 second, it doesn't really do that much of a difference in terms of championship or constructors cup, but that's just the stamp that he wants to put on the sport is, more of a Fernando Alonso, Michael Schumacher kind of, moniker. But it was a great race for Max. It was exciting to see, Charles, I think, was in the lead for 10 laps after Max pitted for
Right.
hard. So that was, a little bit of excitement that we haven't had all season. And I was glad to see it. Another side of the Red Bull coin is Checo. So, qualifying was not his it wasn't his qualifying week this week, right? He started in
Or
P15.
I mean, he hasn't had a good qualifying in what, 4 or 5 races in a row now. He's been failed to miss Q3 quite a few times. It's a little concerning, but he backed it up a little bit for this race.
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of noting his race journey to the top. Starting at P15, he immediately took up 2 places in the first 5 laps. And then, even after Max set the fastest lap, he's able to weave through, pass through George, fight out against Hamilton in lap 22. He's fighting with George again after a couple of pits for P8, and then he's moving his way back up to P5 in lap 42. Um, he makes his way into P3 at a certain point, and starts fighting with Signs, and it was really great to see that back and forth. Signs had another incredible drive. It just wasn't enough to get past the Red Bull, and then at the end, in lap 62, finally overtakes Signs with the DRS. So really great, especially considering all the track limits and penalties that have been going on in this week. For him to have such a clean drive in the actual race and get through all those cars and make the moves that he did, without incurring any penalties, I thought it was a really brilliant drive. Granted, he does have a rocket ship that he's strapped to, but I used to give kudos to Lewis whenever he pulled the same kind of things back in Brazil in 2020, and I'll give Perez his due as well. So I think a great race from Checo. Not strong qualifying. I hope it's not something that persists with him, but definitely was able to kind of take his own kind of destiny in his hands in this race.
Yeah, I think this was really good for his confidence boost, especially even starting out in the sprint race when he got a better start than Max, passed him off the straight into turn one, had a little potential issue with him going down up to turn two where he kind of pushed Max off the road, but the visibility was poor. But yeah, like he definitely showed his racecraft is back and he's ready to compete. And to be able to go from P15 to the podium is quite a feat on any racetrack, especially one like Austria, where it's like so short, it's so fast, a lot of potential potential for errors and going off track. We'll talk more about going off track a little bit later. But yeah, what a great race from Checo, and I think we'll see a little bit more of him back to form. Ultimately, unless there's a disaster, I think it's a little bit too late for him to go back to thinking about the championship. But I think we'll see a solid Checo at least a few more times throughout the rest of the season.
Yeah, good stuff from him. I think he left Christian Horner with a good taste in his mouth. Um, so let's talk about who split the Red Bulls. Ferrari had a really good race, all things considered, this week. What were your thoughts on Ferrari, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. Carlos looked a little bit back to form as well. I think the announcers talked about him showing a little bit back to form, like Silverstone last year when he won. There was a lot of great racecraft from him. Him versus Perez was really fun to watch. Um, I ultimately Ferrari for me showed a little bit of their issues with the whole double stack and taking Carlos out of, I think he was in P3 at the time and gets shuffled behind Lando and Hamilton coming out of the pits because of the slow pit stop plus the double stack. So ultimately I think they could have done a little bit better. And I also questioned not letting Carlos by Charles just because it did look like he was going a little quicker at the time. Granted, he had DRS, but let Carlos go by, see if he can get some pace, to approach the Red Bulls, approach Hamilton and all that. And then if not, just swap him back. But and this is a little difficult to put together, but maybe swapping DRS behind each other and you could kind of maybe slingshot your way forward a little bit. I don't know how well that would work, but I thought it was at least worth an experiment because Carlos was definitely putting the pressure. But Ferrari was just like, nope, no attack, don't attack. And I would like to have let them race and see what could have been.
Yeah, I think you know when you look at the standings at the end, it looks like Charles had a way better race. But I actually think that Sainz put in a lot of the work to keep his position and to regain his position despite kind of I would snafus of the strategies that his team put forward. So if we were to chronicle Carlos's race, he started in P3. And by lap 9, he's already telling his engineers he has faster pace than Charles, which they kind of don't really respond to in a way that's very concrete. They just kind of let him fight it out a little bit. He by lap 14, he's requesting a fight for Max, which I thought was a little bit ambitious because Max had a 5 second delta by then, and it was only growing. And then by lap 17, you can really hear him, get frustrated why they didn't let him stay out after the virtual safety car that made, they were lucky enough to be able to get in because the virtual safety car stayed active for I think 2 or 3 laps. So, but Carlos was like, why'd you put me in that position? Why didn't you just let me stay out there? My tires were good enough. I had great pace. But the good thing that came out of that is he sets the fastest lap immediately in lap 18 after that pit. And then he's able to squeeze by Hamilton. He overtakes Perez into P3 in lap 20, and sets the fastest lap. And then he momentarily gains position on Max by lap 26. So it looks like he's having a really great race, right? And then he has to serve a 5 second penalty for his track limits in lap 29. Then again, he's back in it. He's performing in lap 47, passes by Norris. Norris kind of gives him a gentlemanly, window to go by. I think they have a good history together, so Norris doesn't really fight him too hard on that. And then that brilliant battle against Checo in lap 59, where they're kind of going back and forth through the switches, and it so fun to see. And then eventually he has to kind of concede to Checo in lap 62. But something that was interesting, Chris, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is the radio messaging between between the team and the drivers started kind of early on in lap 14. Sainz is requesting to fight for Max, expressing his frustrations, and then in lap 33 Ferrari reaches out to Charles and asks, what do you think about 3 stops? And Charles essentially like, no, like he just says 2 no's and then goes silent. Do you think this is a better way of them communicating, Chris? Like just more blunt and direct, even if it seems a little bit rude? Do you
Yeah.
think this is better for them?
I mean, this is for me, this is exactly where Ferrari is lacking. Yeah, I probably should go back and listen to a lot of other team radios like for the entirety of the race and see how they operate. But Ferrari just seems to be disjointed and in constant disagreement with their drivers. And when you have someone buttoned up like Red Bull and you have like Hannah, the chief strategist, and like all the people back in Milton Keynes in the factory, they have so much more data than the drivers do. The drivers have the feel of the track, what the tires look like, any kind of issues with the car, how it's feeling, if it's slippery. But every other piece of data, what the other teams are doing, how the car's performing from a technical standpoint, lap times, everything is at the hands of all these people. And for the drivers at Ferrari to constantly feel and seem like they know more about the situation every time, and the engineers at Ferrari to constantly saying, "What do you think?" Or like they always seem to be second guessing themselves and they don't really know what to do. And I think that this is where they're lacking, and they shouldn't be requesting fights for Max. They shouldn't be requesting extra pit stops and all this kind of stuff from the drivers. It should be, or the driver should be doing that to the team. The team should be telling them what is the optimal strategy. And if the driver wants to fight back about something because maybe they know something the team doesn't from a personal standpoint, great. But the team should basically be like, this is what you should do. And more often than not, they're just constantly butting heads. And it's almost comical to keep listening to because you know it's going to happen every race. It's Sainz like berating the team over the radio. And now Charles seems to be picking up a little bit of the sass from Sainz. But yeah, I definitely think if they want to constantly get podiums and fight for wins, they're going to have to figure this out.
Yeah, there was a point, I forgot what the radio communication was, but I think it was just an informative thing that the engineers were telling Carlos, and he sounded like a freaking robot. Even David Coulthard and Julian Palmer were like, they made fun of him. They're like, is that a computer generated voice? And what I mean by that, in stark
We are
contrast
checking.
to in stark contrast, McLaren, when they're radioing into Lando, it's a really personal note. They're like, Lando, you're gonna hate me for saying this, but you have to stay on track. Like they know and Lando respected that. He's like, all right, like I get it. Like the way that you delivered that message to me. And even when Toto was like doing damage control with Lewis, like it's like, Lewis, I know the car is bad. Please keep driving it. It's on the basis of human interaction, where
Right.
I don't think for I'll put it this way. I don't think Carlos Sainz and Charles go out and grab like drinks with their engineers, or like, espressos. Like I don't think they do that. I think there's a basic humanness that's lost between the communication with the engineers and the drivers at Ferrari. It's almost like they're trying to maintain a separation, like, whereas other teams are really leaning into like the driver engineering relationship. So I don't know, it's you can hear it in the communication between the drivers and the engineers, but I guess the drivers have picked up on it as well, and now they're essentially just short, curt, and to the point, and I think they were able to get a decent result out of it today. I don't know if it's due strictly to the communication or the drivers taking a little bit more, uh, um, being a little bit more autonomous with what they're able to do out there. But I guess we'll see in the next couple of races if this is something that continues for them.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely tell like Lewis and Bono have a history, and Max and Giampiero, and like even Valtteri and James back in the day. Like you can tell that these guys have a long history together, and they sort of understand each other and get each other, and they may have disagreements, or they may determine to go different ways, but they definitely know each other. They know how to talk to each other. They know how to interact with one another to sort of like get results out of that. And like you said, the Ferrari engineers just seem very robotic, um, not on the same page with these drivers. And these guys have been there for a while now. So you feel like that they should have that kind of relationship, but they don't. So listen, I think Ferrari either needs changes behind the scenes, or the drivers are going to make changes themselves. And so I think that's ultimately where we're going to go.
Yeah, well, let's not stick too much on Ferrari, or we might give them good luck. Let's talk about let's talk about these track limits and the penalties this race, Chris. It looks about nine drivers had some sort of penalty attached to their name, mostly due to track limits. What were you, if you were to, well, first of all, I'd love to get your just thoughts on Austria, the track limits, and how it's kind of the nature of the track, if you think it needs to be changed. And then I'd love to get your thoughts on which of these are the most egregious penalties that you saw from all nine drivers.
Well, listen, I think that um, how we talked before about the stewards and how they need more permanent stewards, and they're constantly just getting one-ups for tracks. I don't know if you looked at the list of stewards, but it was Oprah Winfrey up in there just giving track limits out to everybody. You get a penalty, you get a penalty, you get a penalty.
Wait,
And
seriously?
no, I'm just joking.
Oh,
No,
I was like, man, I
no,
must have missed that.
no. It's just these track violations and were everywhere. And so this is a complicated issue because I'm kind of with the FIA and the stewards on this. Like, I'm glad that they're sort of cracking down on the rule set and making things standard, like we discussed earlier on in the season, being more consistent. And so, yeah, if you're going over the white lines and you're breaking the rules, you're going to get a penalty. However, when a track is designed in such a way that lends itself to this many potential penalties, I think something needs to change. Not only because I think it takes a little bit of um, integrity away from the sport when we're constantly having things like results determined hours after the race, and we're also just constantly having lots of penalties during the race, and you're just sort of like not watching just actual on track action, and it's more of like who's getting the least amount of penalties. So, I think I read somewhere that the FAA had asked Red Bull to install gravel pits at the exits of the turns, which, will change the way the drivers perform and drive. Because if you go into the gravel, you can get beached, you're done, you're going to lose a lot more time. And so they'll make sure that they don't go over the white lines. So I'm not sure what the thought process is here about not making those changes, or not doing something a little bit different, making it a little wider, because ultimately, like, as interesting as it is and watching drivers take it to the limit, if that many drivers are constantly going off, then the track is a little bit problematic.
Yeah, I'm right on there on par with you. I think you have 20 drivers and nine of them are incurring, track limit penalties. That's almost half the grid. I think when it's at a certain percentage of the grid, then you do have to take a look at the grid itself and see if there are adjustments that you need to make. I think this grid, and this is just me kind of, this is like my third year watching this races on this grid. So what I've seen is it's a grid that's meant to, you're able to go fast. It's a shorter grid, but the turns are, they require you to brake a little bit earlier to be able to maintain that same pace, but to be able to hit the apex and not go over track limits. I mean, Lando did it, Checo did it. So it's not to say it can't be done, but I'm starting to wonder if, with the amount of cars on the track and given their width, if this track is inherently going to guarantee people go off track limits. And if that's the case, then I think they need to take another look at expanding some of those turns or making a little bit wider, so it's not a guarantee that one of those cars is gonna you can get every single car in on pace and in track limits, and everyone has a chance. Like, I think the way that it's just structured, you're either going to have to give up a lot of positions and not get the penalty and just hope someone else gets it and keep calling them out on it, which is super annoying to hear on the radio. Or you let them fight it in an open amount of space, and if they end up going off track, then like that's on the driver's decision. I don't think it's a driver's decision. Yeah, I don't think it's a driver's decision in certain points. I think you saw a couple of drivers go off track and being forced off track, and I just think that when, yeah, like you said, when the majority of the field is incurring these kinds of track limit penalties, you should take another look at it and see what you can do to adjust that track.
I mean, Esteban Ocon set the record for the most penalties in a race, and which we didn't think would be possible after, all the penalty incurred at Bahrain this year. And, Lewis Hamilton plus 15 seconds, Carl Sainz plus 15 seconds, Esteban plus 35 seconds, Nick DeVries plus 20, Alex 15, Yuki 20, Pierre 15, Logan 15. These are not just, one off everyone getting, these are multiple infringements on half the grid. And this is one of my favorite tracks. I love this track, and I don't want the expectation going into next year to be like, oh, we won't even know the results of this race until they count up the penalties. You know, I still like the spirit of like enforcing the rules, and I don't want them to change any of that. But I definitely think maybe there could be some adjustments made either to the cars or to the tracks, add a gravel trap, whatever needs to happen, you know, just make it a little bit better because this was a little crazy. And I don't, if you heard the after the track or after the race team radio on Alpine's engineers to Esteban, they were like, oh man, a lot of people got penalties, but you kept it. You didn't get any penalties. Good job, Esteban. And then all of a sudden, boom, slammed with tons of penalties post race. Just it's a little embarrassing, and then for everybody, and it's a little, we're tired of the Abu Dhabi situation of just figuring out what's going to happen hours or days or whatever later. Like in rare occurrences, sure, but most of the time I want when the checkered flag flies for that to be the result. So, well, hopefully that they'll figure a way to button this up for next year. But man, what a crazy penalty race.
Yeah, I mean, it does take away a little bit from, and just hearing everyone tattletale on each other just it also took some integrity away from the drivers. Like, listening to Lewis just become like essentially a 17-year-old kind of just complaining about like his classmates essentially.
Yeah.
It that's not the Lewis Hamilton I really want to see. I want to see a Lewis Hamilton who, if he's frustrated, it's for for probably a little bit more malignant reasons, not just because someone's going off track in front of him and he's having to, you know, spew out his own frustrations and then Lando, you already know that, my thoughts on Lando. But it was just, I think it takes away from the actual sport itself. So I'm looking forward to seeing if they make any kind of changes to this track, but knowing the FIA, I doubt that they will.
Well,
So
I want to
yeah,
add one more. By the way, I'll never get over the fact that these guys are going 200 miles an hour plus, high speed turns, potential for like massive crashes on a tight track, and they have the ability to just have these like casual, nonchalant conversations over team radio. They're like, "Hey, did you see that? Take a note down. Like he went off over there, and like give me the updates on the FAA and stuff like that." It's like, bro, like drive the car. Like, how are you talking? How are you just chilling? So,
I
but
mean, that's what happens when you've been racing since you were fucking 10 years, 5 years old,
yeah,
it becomes a second nature thing. And they're the best drivers in the world. I want to see that in the most absolute pristine light that I can.
yeah,
I don't want it to be degraded with stupid team radio messages being like, "Hey, did you see him? Did he go off track? Did you see that? Make a note." Like it really does turn it into a rated PG-13 kind of film for me.
yep.
So yeah, that's just my thoughts on that. But let's look into our winners, losers, and our hot seats. Who do you have for your winners this week, Chris?
I'm gonna go a little off the typical path here. I'm gonna say my big winner for this week is the sprint race. Um, the sprint race this week was actually really kind of exciting to watch. All from down to lap one to the end, there was tons of overtakes. It was a wet track that dried out at the end, so there was a lot of changeover, a lot of overtakes, a lot of crazy instances because of the wet track. Sergio and Max almost collided, big pileup. Lando went into anti-stall in the first turn and lost like 4 or 5 places, and it was exciting. There was lots of overtakes in the wet. Track dried up. Some people went off inter, some people didn't. There was a lot of overtakes due to that. And I just thought it was actually exciting to watch. But the reverse side of that is that once the race happened, when we were, prepping for this, I was like, oh yeah, I forgot it was a sprint weekend. So there's still something missing there in terms of in the moment, it was exciting. I was so happy to watch it. And I was like, finally a great sprint race. But after the race was over, it was like completely out of my mind and irrelevant to the weekend. So I definitely think there's still some work to be done with it. But overall, I was super happy to have a sprint race. And then the other winner I have for the week is, Sergio. Sergio had that great race, terrible qualifying, but was able to sort of take it from P15 onto the podium. He's back to form. So I think he should be, excited about that kind of result and looking to going forward of continuing to make some podiums. Ultimately, I don't know if that extends his contract or career with Red Bull, even if he does perform, but we'll see. How about
Yeah,
you?
I think having the sprint this weekend, it was a different sprint than I've seen in other, in past. But I think you hit a really good point. It's something that I really did forget about as soon as the real race started and I had to just kind of switch gears. It also left me thinking like, hey, was that it? Like, it's such a short race, it's 20 laps. It does leave you thinking that you only saw the first part of the movie.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I totally understand what you mean, and there's like a bit of a disconnect, a disconnect there. But I would say my winners for this week are Charles. He held P1 from laps 25 to 35. He then he just didn't defend the inside against Max and locked up, so Max was able to overtake. I was expecting that to happen, but to at least see Charles come in at P1 shows that that he has pace. The car has pace. Now they just need to tune some things up to make sure they can keep at least fighting for P2, P3. I don't think they have enough pace to catch up to Max just outright, but all signs are kind of pointing up, and I hope that this is something that they can kind of keep up just for the driver's sake in the next couple of weeks. Ferrari itself, I think they did, despite the communication or the miscommunications with their drivers, I think Carlos and Charles both put in really good drives this week, and collected some good points for the Constructors' Cup. Lando, he finished P4. He's historically have been really, this has been a great track for him. Um, uh, you know, as much as I'm not the biggest Lando fan, it's good to see someone, kind of master certain racetracks and just be really good at them. Checo, I'll put up there as well. Granted, he put himself in a bit of a hole in qualifying. He was able to kind of dig himself out of it and get into P3, like we mentioned earlier, an incredible race. So yeah, I think that rounds out my winners for the week. Um, Losers for this week, Chris. Um, I put Mercedes in there. They didn't have pace. You saw the McLaren and in Lando's hand kind of overtake Lewis on multiple occasions. George really wasn't able to, make any kind of position or in way into the top four for a long period of time. They netted out at seventh and eighth, so a really tough week for them. And we'll see if the upgrades is something that's just gonna is better suited for Silverstone and other tracks, and this track just wasn't it. Haas, Magnussen came in P20 and Hulkenberg didn't even finish, and he had such a promising start to sprint weekend and to qualifying. It's just tough to keep seeing them with the the kind of bag just falls out from under them. Also would put Piastri there. Just the delta between him at P16 and Lando and P4 was really jarring to see. I think that, even though this is his rookie year, with those upgrades that we saw with McLaren, I feel like he should have been at least in that P13, P11 area. And then Ocon, like you mentioned, 35 seconds of penalties, came in behind Logan Sargent. It's just inexcusable there. But I also think, the miscommunication between his engineers and himself probably also fueled a tough week for Esteban. Who are your losers, Chris?
Yeah. So quick note on Piastri. So I think Lando was actually the only one to have the upgrades this week. I think Zach Brown said that on the track walk. So, well, I'm gonna give Piastri a little. I was also gonna put him up on the losers, but I'm gonna give him a week to prove himself if he gets the upgrades at the next race, so that way we can see where he's actually really at. But um my loser this week is not really a loser. I put Aston Martin on there only because they've had such a dominant presence from now, and this weekend they did not have a terrible race, but I think there's signs of other teams upgrades starting to perform. Ferrari's got a better car now. McLaren looks like they have a better car incoming. Mercedes have shown some promise from race to race, and I think if Aston Martin doesn't follow suit and continue to upgrade the car and figure out what exactly where their pain points might be, they might find themselves in that fifth, sixth to 10th, spot for the future races if other people are performing. So now that, Aston Martin had that huge leap at the start of the season, but now other teams are figuring it out, they may not be as dominant. And even though, Stroll had a good race today, started, he had a good sprint and a race. Where did he start in the race? Like he started ninth. But he ended P4. And so that was a good result for him. And yeah, he started eighth and he ended fourth. So, ultimately they had a decent race, but they just weren't fighting for the podium. They were never in that conversation. So I think that they need to sort of look back and hope that they also have future upgrades coming so they can continue to push to the front, especially someone like Fernando to lock up that P2 or P3 and the driver's championship.
Yeah, I think great points. And again, it really illustrates development and the development cycle for someone who might just be starting to appreciate that piece of F1 after watching it for a few years. You start understanding that it is a engineer based competition,
Yep.
like much like how Matt Sam mentioned last week on our episode. But yeah, the engineering pieces for McLaren seem to be coming together. It's hard to tell since Lando is historically just really good at the Red Bull ring. So we'll see in the next couple of races how that performance comes up. Mercedes, it's hard to tell if they're tottering, between good and better, or taking a stutter step back. So it's all things that are going to matriculate as we go into the next couple of races. And who knows, maybe Alpine has a push in them to bridge that front or mid pack together even closer. So I know they're under some pressure to perform more from Lauren Rossi. So I think that this will be a really interesting mid pack competition we'll see in the next couple of races.
Yep.
And it seems like for hot seat, we're on the same page. Let's talk about it, Chris. AlphaTauri.
Yeah.
What are you
AlphaTauri.
thinking?
Yeah, just like obviously we've both have our opinions on Nick DeVries, and he's just been super underperforming. It's been kind of at the back of the pack every race. He almost reminds me of a Mazepin, which is so awkward considering he is a champion in a different series, and just to be constantly in the back of the pack. But yeah, both Yuki and DeVries had a kind of a really bad race, penalties across the board, and Yuki went off track, um, had some damage on his wing, and just ultimately just all around bad race. I know they have some future planned changes. I think they're going to do a name change next year and make some leadership changes. But for me, they at the moment they're in a hot seat. Something needs to change.
Yeah, Yuki just into lap one, he was off track already. Putting
Yep.
himself at a disadvantage. He break really deep into I think turn 2 or 3, and was already out of contention. Nick drove uh, Kevin Magnussen off track, and that wasn't a good look. It's just these compounding, mistakes that they're making now. And I thought Yuki was beyond it, but I guess he still has a lot of development left to do. The when you think about the driver two position for Red Bull, and Checo seems like he has a pretty sturdy hand on it at the moment, but it's still a volatile seat. And you consider, them talking about Danny Ricciardo, and then the praises that Christian Horner saying about Alex Albon after last week's race, um, and potentially eyeing him to come back to the Red Bull family. And then you have Yuki, who's another person to consider. It's when you put it through that lens, I think Yuki's making less of a case for himself to be that D2 driver for Red Bull. So, when I think about it like that, I think this was a really rough race for Yuki. I think he had a lot of opportunity to show something, to maybe begin to P9, given all the track limits that everyone was incurring. If he would have just kept a steady drive going instead of being so heavy-handed or heavy-footed, I think he could have. I think he could have been in points today. I don't think Nick DeVries will ever get a point as long as he lives in F1. And today just proved, or this week just proved that a little bit more. So yeah, I think AlphaTauri, this is not going to be the team that they go into next year with. I'd be surprised if Nick DeVries keeps his job through the rest of this year, given how Daniel Ricciardo is kind of, you know, in the realm of possibilities to come in as the backup driver for AlphaTauri. Yeah, just a shit show for AlphaTauri this week.
Yeah, I definitely think Nick's going to lose his seat in the summer break, unless there's some contractual things. But I know that Red Bull's kind of given him, not Horner, Helmut Marko has given him kind of a 4-race warning, and 2 of those races have gone by, and he's done nothing but, underperform. He, in both the sprint and in the race, he finished behind where he qualified. I think both Yuki and Nick did. So just overall bad weekend for them. Like you said, I don't think they're going to go into the next year with the same lineup. I think Danny Rick is, if he's interested, is going to take that seat, see where he is, and then we'll determine where he goes next year. But yeah, there definitely needs to be some changes. Like I know they don't have the best car on the grid, but Yuki's been fighting for points every race, and this weekend was just not that. Yeah, man, let's we've kind of like ragged on, Nick and AlphaTauri and these guys a lot, but if we go off track a little bit, we have kind of a somber topic to talk about. We had another death in a Formula Series over the weekend. I I'm very upset if I mispronounce his name, is Delano Van Toff. He's only 18 years old at Spa, and again, another victim of the El Rouge to Radion to the Kimmel Straight. Um, just kind of a dangerous situation. But a lot of people are talking about how this is more on the FIA than the drivers, because these guys are just going full blast in no visibility conditions. Same thing happened with Antoine Hubert, although it wasn't wet on that track. And then it almost happened to Lando when he had that big shunt off Spa. And why am I forgetting his name? The coolest guy in F1 history, Sebastian Vettel. Pulled up next to Lando, made sure he was okay. But if Vettel had been right behind him, he could have easily smacked right into Lando and ended his life as well. So, it's just kind of really unfortunate. This sport is very dangerous, but having an 18-year-old lose their life on track in a situation that is most likely preventable. I don't know if you know this, but it was the last lap of the race, or the second to last lap of the race, right after a safety car, and a lot of people were like, they should just never have been gone back to racing for one lap in super wet, no visibility conditions. But yeah, super unfortunate situation.
Yeah, it's tough to see, it's tough to hear, and prayers with his family. Lance Stroll had commented on the same turn, and the FIA reconsidering it, and the inherent dangers of it. The Formula Series post 2010, post 2000 actually has had the highest count of deaths when you compare it to comparable sports like IndyCar and NASCAR, which is probably inherent to the sport as well, just kind of given the speeds that they're going at and the structure of the car and the tracks themselves. But it just goes to show you, it's a dangerous sport. The guys that drive in it, and the women that drive in the women's series, they are putting themselves in the highest levels of danger, kind of going into the sport. And I think it's something that uh like the halo that came into effect and essentially saved Joe's life last year. So there's a lot of, I'd hate to say that there's not development happening on that front and innovating safety that later gets put into commercial regular cars that we use. So I guess this is the tip of the spear where that happens. And some people can chalk it up to, just the nature of the game. But I think that there is room. Well, of course, there's room for improvement in terms of safety. It's just going to be more of a step-by-step process when it comes to formula races, unfortunately.
Yeah, it feels weird because every one of these deaths is both a freak accident and definitely seems maybe a little preventable, especially the Jules Bianchi crash. Should never have been a tractor out on track. This one, drivers were going way too fast in low visibility conditions under yellows, and questionable whether they should have been racing. So,
And
this
do you remember, Chris? It was like, was it Japan last year, the year before, where it was heavy rain and there was a white like tractor out like in the middle of the race, and just I think George Russell or someone like just barely saw it and was able to call it in uh before like someone got seriously injured. And yeah, you're right. Like it's like freak accidents. It's like, you have cars going at 200,000 miles or 200 miles an hour, and you have so many different factors that you have to take into consideration. Any blind spot, no pun intended, is is paramount to consider here.
right.
So it's definitely something that it, I don't want to make it seem like I think the FIA is not considering all deaths, like a really important thing, or but if this were to happen in an American sport, like a purely American, like a NASCAR, if there was a death in NASCAR year or every other year or something like that, like there would be a problem. Like the sport would probably have to shut down for like a year or so, and reconsider how they're doing things, and make things safer. But because it's a sport that's kind of international, and there's a lot of stakeholders that have to be looked after. I don't know, maybe the deaths seem less significant. I don't know if that's the best way to put it, but definitely something that I've been kind of picking up on is they're able to kind of wave these deaths away and just go on to the next race, business as usual. So I don't know. It's just something that I've noticed in my couple of years of starting to watch the race and having already seen two deaths. Um, it's definitely it's a sad consideration for this rate for this sport. So I'll leave it at that. I hope it's something that they take a look at in terms of changing up the track and that turn specifically. um and yeah, that's kind of all I have on that topic.
Yeah, just um the last thing I'll add is just, the it feels like surreal because we watch things like Drive to Survive, and we get like really intimate with these drivers' personal lives. And they're so iconic, like when Kobe died, like nobody thought guys like that could just die at freak accidents like that. And so like we see Roman Grosjean get pulled from a fireball, and we see crazy crashes happen in Formula One. And when Max hit the barrier at 51 Gs, and when Lewis bumped him off the track at Silverstone, like you just like think
or
these
or when
guys are,
Mick hit the wall, I think.
and his car split in half, and yeah,
Yeah,
at
like,
Jeddah.
yeah, and he still without a scratch.
Or when Gojan Joe flipped his car and slid down the track and went over the barriers. And all
Yeah.
these guys have walked away from those accidents, no scratches, and just kind of, went to the hospital, got a thumbs up, and went home. And it's like, but they are vulnerable, and these other series and accidents have proven that you know easily those accidents can go the wrong way. So hopefully the FAI does take a hard look at ways to start mitigating this stuff. Like, as much as I love wet races, when there's zero visibility, maybe it's just too dangerous to do stuff like that. So hopefully we can figure it out. And unfortunately, just in like in real life, freak accidents can happen, but hopefully we can do more to prevent the ones that are preventable, like the tractor stuff we talked about, where Gasly and I think Stroll, like they basically just ripped a new one to the FAA for allowing that to ever happen so close to after that took Jules Bianchi's life. But yeah, again, condolences to the family. It's super unfortunate, but hopefully we can move forward and not have this happen again. But yeah, so off this, the somber note, like we got 4 races in July. We're only missing 1 weekend in the month, which is great. Silverstone is next. So like we talked about last just a few moments ago, like I think Silverstone is like a pure racing track, one of the ultimate and best that there is. So I think we'll get to see some true results of like where these upgrades are taking the teams, where they kind of should be, and hopefully we don't have a slew of penalties. But I'm excited, and I want to see some true racing at the front. I don't think anybody's touching Max, but if we just pretend like he's not there, we we could look at everyone behind and have a good race.
Yeah, so it seems like our first two are the same. So we both have Max and Lewis. Max, in a league of his own right now. Lewis has been historically a good performer on at Silverstone, home track for them. So I can definitely see Mercedes, both British drivers, putting in some good points here. P3, we have differences. I have Carlos Sainz, just given he's also a strong performer, and just kind of given his drive from this week. Hopefully this momentum carries into Silverstone. I have Max, Lewis, and Carlos rounding out the top three.
Yeah, I think that's super solid prediction. Signs is super good performance this weekend. Definitely possible for to be on the podium. But given the track, and I want to see Aston Martin back at the top. I want to see Fernando uh, take his racecraft, which is going to be really important at Silverstone, and get him back on the podium. But if they aren't, I think that'll be even more telling and worrying for Aston Martin for the rest of the season. But I think it'll be a great race. I'm excited about it. I'm also excited we don't have a week off. So yeah, I'm super much looking forward to it. And we're only a few days away.
Only a few days away.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, Chris. It's going to be a month full of racing, which is exciting for both of us and for F1 fans all around the world. We will be here right alongside you to keep you posted on our thoughts on everything. Stay tuned for the next episode.
Yep. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.